I hear from so many leaders that they can't find good people to fill their jobs, whether it's from turnover or growth. And one of the things we do, as you know, is we do recruiting. And as a recruiter, in certain fields, I do agree it is hard to find good people. But then if we turn the tables and we just get a little bit creative and recruit differently, it is actually easier. And today's guest, Meghan Hovee, has done that. She is the CEO and founder of Hovee & Co., a CPA firm where they do fractional CFO work. And she has a very innovative internship program that takes individuals from an intern to a CFO. If you remember from a few weeks ago, we talked to Levi Torres about his apprenticeship program for plumbers. And I want to get her perspective and her view on her internship process and talk about the differences between the two and see if it will help you have a better luck hiring. Meghan, welcome to How I Turned the Corner.
Thank you so much for having me, Kendra.
I'm really grateful you're here. I'd love for you to just give us a little intro into what you guys do over at Hovee & Co.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So our focus at the firm is to serve truly small businesses. So we say that's about 0 to 5 or 10 million in revenue, depending on the service model. But it's really the small business that we're focused on. It's as you get to be more corporate level size business, it's affordable to have a CPA either outsourced or in-house. It's affordable to have your own accounting team. But in the small business world, we just have, I noticed as I went to be self-employed, I just noticed that it's almost not underserved, it's almost not served in the accounting world. So small businesses are a little bit lost with maybe they can find a tax person who will maybe communicate with them and file on time, but then the rest of the year is kind of a black hole for communication and support. So what we do is we really try to partner with our clients, just periodically check in and have more of a touch base with our clients ongoing. So we're trying to innovate the accounting relationship for the small business.
That's great. Yeah, it is definitely a big hole as a small business myself. It's been one of the more challenging, things services to try to find. So tell us then with this model, like we're right now recruiting for a few accounting roles, and definitely. It is challenging. Like there's the culture side of finding a really good accountant is hard. You've got usually
Mm.
people who maybe have the skill and have the background, but not always just that personality and the sort of culture fit. But you've kind of experienced that too, it sounds like, and you've kind of come up with this new program. Can you just share some of the reasons and some of the pitfalls you've experienced over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of went from having a lifestyle business as a woman who wanted to own my own schedule, and realized there was just such a deep need and that it wasn't really this like cute niche that I had found, but it was really something that we could really change the way businesses are served on a bigger scale. So that was my reason for deciding to hire and be really strategic about growing my firm that was a solo practitioner shop in the beginning. But what I had decided, I just maybe it's the accountant in me, but I was really scrappy and savvy about how I wanted to grow. And I knew that like going out and hiring another CPA who had practiced for a very long time, mostly it started from it's not necessarily in the budget or the way that I like to scale. My risk tolerance is probably in the middle. It's not super high. So I decided I'd interview, folks who were more sort of green and fresh in their accounting, like definitely had the fundamentals, but, were just younger in terms of their accounting career. And I realized, if I call it an internship and then offer that full-time position at the end of it, should it be successful, that would probably be really appealing to someone who wanted to find an accounting career, but maybe they're finishing up some education or some licensure, testing and stuff. So that's how I started. Was I really interviewed folks who were really hungry and green and really people centered. That is something that I think is unique about me, is that I am that more introverted, left brain analytical person, but I kind of act more like an extrovert. I really enjoy groups of people. I enjoy speaking, that. And so, and I just really enjoy people. I enjoy, helping them and seeing, what the work that I do, seeing that make a difference. So I knew I was looking for maybe what was a little bit more of a unicorn in the accounting world, but I had my first hire in 2020 in the middle of COVID. Our firm was having babies everywhere, and I found someone, and she was an absolute gem. And actually, I can't not tell this story. It's kind of hilarious, but I had done a few interviews, and when you're interviewing, kind of the more you've done it, the more you have that experience of like someone's great on paper, but you get through the interview and you just have that conclusion that like it's not exactly what I'm looking for. And so I interviewed this gal, and she was very young, and she was working as a nanny, and she had a young child, and she was expecting as well. And she hadn't had the tax background, and she was finishing her accounting degree. And I just loved her. And I mean, it was a normal interview process, asked the traditional questions, but I really just thought she's the one. And I went home that weekend to like my husband and my sister, just kind of telling them about the different candidates. And they were like, "Oh, you interviewed someone who is expecting and doesn't have a tax background, is just barely doing accounting." And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "I don't know." And I thought, okay, yeah, maybe you're right. And then that Monday I was like, "Nope, I have to hire her." And she was our first like intern to CFO. And oh my gosh, she's an absolute just gem in our firm, and one of our just resident experts, and absolutely wonderful at what she does. But that was kind of my first experience in trying to be a little bit creative with
Mm.
hiring. So
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's really good. And so it's interesting because I think um, younger employees or employees that are just newer into their career, they also need to be not only taught how to do the job, but how to have a job.
yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you just share a little bit about like how much structure is there on of course, the skill side, and then what are the other things you're doing from more of that mentoring side?
Yeah, absolutely. That is kind of my philosophy with management and leadership, is to try to be really clear about expectations so that there's no blaming, there's no like try to remove the emotion out of developing as an employee and growing. So in the beginning, when I would have my own frustrations as a business owner or a leader, I would ask myself, well, do I have a clear expectation around X? And is there like, and do I or don't I? And if I do, is there any consequence if that expectation is not met? Because if I don't have a clear expectation, then I absolutely can't have a conversation or any kind of performance review about that if there's not a clear expectation in the beginning. Like we got to kind of grow up as business owners or leaders. And then just, yeah, what is the consequence? Because if there is an expectation, but there's no like, if this happened, then that happened, this is the result. It just, again, it's like raising children. Just so what? Why do we have the expectation then? So it is extremely important to me when I first started hiring, when I knew I wanted to scale. I just thought I've been so successful because clients really enjoy that there's a personal relationship and they see the same person every time. So I knew longevity of employees was going to be key. I knew that I was enjoying my role so much because I was an owner. And I thought, well, if I'm going to hire employees that are going to stay with the firm for a long time, they're going to have to feel like owners in a sense, like that empowerment of having some ownership over your schedule, how you do the work you do. So that's what we've done, is we found this balance between you kind of get to form the type of clients you work with and how often do you want to meet remote versus in person. And your schedule can be hybrid. You can be home some days and in office some days. But then we set expectations like, if your schedule is everyone needs to have a baseline schedule. If it is going to change, you need to communicate that to like your lead CFO by the Friday before. You try to set some structure around that more free, like open way of deciding how your schedule is going to be. And then we just have metrics. Like you might decide that you only meet with clients 2 times a week and the rest of the week is project based, or you might decide that you're, in office 2 days and you're remote the rest. But like, here's your numbers. Like, here's the numbers that you need to kind of hit. And it's just a report. Like you did hit those numbers or you didn't. And then, we can go from there. But it's just really important to me to kind of remove like I've seen, especially I think in professional services with accountants, with lawyers, so your craft really well, and you don't necessarily know like management, leadership, boundaries, emotional intelligence. You don't necessarily know those things well. And if you're not proactive about that, what you can end up doing is hiring people, expecting them to be you, getting really frustrated when they're not, and then just kind of having temper tantrums or being overly easy and then wondering why you're not hitting your financial goals. Like there just has to be a lot of intentionality, I think, in we're not making it this means something about your employee. It's just here's like really clear metrics, and then we can figure out how to go from here if we're not hitting them, you
Hmm.
know. So
Yeah, I think so. A lot of what you just said, I think, is really important to highlight for the listeners too. So there's there there's no way you can have an environment that's flexible if you do not have goals that are clear, and then the metrics that support the goals, and then the consequences if they don't hit the goals. Like that is so essential. And by the way, Megan, rare. So many of the businesses we work with, I'm like, well, what are the goals? Well, make money. It's like, that isn't a goal, right? And so, I mean, there's maybe not that, you know,
right,
glib, but I mean, it's not far from that. And it's so critical that we are more clear about that. And I think it's not just for the benefit of the business and the bottom line, but it's especially important for younger employees too. There's going to be some employees that are maybe a little bit more seasoned that can kind of figure it out and kind
mhm,
of see what direction needs to kind of go, but that's not going to be for somebody who is new into working at all. And so I
right,
love that you're doing that. And then I think a second big piece is also being really clear. So for anyone who's listening that is in a professional services organization and like billing on an hourly basis, that's so important that you're clear too on what is that utilization rate? Like what are you expecting people to hit so that your bottom line is sound, right? And so
right,
and that can be such a good metric also for being clear around like, okay, you got to bill, like in our case, we want everyone
mhm,
to be billing hopefully around 32 hours a week. And
right.
so, which is an 80% utilization rate basically. And so, so that's so cool that you're doing that now. And I can just picture all of it. Like I can picture your bottom line and how healthy it is because of all of that. Right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny how similar our companies are. That is exactly it. And it took me probably a year or 2 years to develop like metrics and reporting that were more automated for that purpose. So it was like during our busy season, we have you have to call it effective billable hours. In the beginning, everyone thinks it's client, it's billable. Like, oh, those are two very different things. So we just had to come up with a clear metric and then clear reporting because I think my Vistage chair said this to me once, like you can say something to an employee 10 times, but if they don't hear what you're saying, like then you didn't say it. So it took a lot of times of kind of explaining the process and automating it and making it as simple for my teammates to understand. But then once we did, it's just so cut and dry. It's like we're there or we're not, and then let's have a conversation about how we can get there if we're not. But it's exactly that. What are your effective billable hours? And in the busy season, that's a higher number. And something really key, and feel that feeling of feeling self-employed, which doesn't have to be important for all companies, but that's important for mine, I believe, in the longevity. So it's ownership over work style and schedule and things like that, but it's also having some leverage over your earnings. And so I know that as especially, I mean, we're all female firm right now. So just the reality is a lot of us are young moms, and there's going to be times in life where you kind of maybe want to go a little more pedal to the metal and earn more, especially as like self-employed folks. That's true too, I think. And so, or are there times where quality of life is really important, new babies, whatever the case may be, and it's more I prioritize quality of life more. So I wanted to provide that leverage of earnings for my employees too, and not just for me as the owner. And so that's part of it too, is like I set those metrics so that you can hit this number and be okay, and then like that's perfectly satisfactory. Or if you want to go above that, then X% of billings are go to your bonus. So it's like just really important to me that, again, for longevity purpose, I'm thinking, what would I want if I were in their shoes?
Hmm. So let's go back around to the internship program. So, um, have you, I mean, do you have kind of a plan? Like, do you have it laid out around like what someone's going to experience for a certain period of time as an intern?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So it's really for us that we found the kind of the right fit in terms of length of the program is really about 6 to 12 months. And so we kind of call it a more accelerated program. If someone does come in maybe like with their CPA license, that's like a 3 month program before we're assigning clients to you. And then if someone comes in like accounting degree and we need to get them a certification to prepare taxes and things like that, it's the longer program. But yeah, what it looks like is a lot of learning, a lot of maybe more textbook learning if they need that credential still, a lot of in-person learning with different teammates who have specialties in different areas, and then a lot of practice. So in our firm, we have it's really simple. We have CFOs, and CFOs have paras, just like a lawyer has a paralegal. And so they function like a para as a part of that internship so that they can learn really the ins and outs. Like a para ultimately sees everything that comes across the CFO's desk. They see tax returns, they see accounting projects, they see, payroll tax notice issues, like you name it, they see it. So an intern has that more traditional like textbook learning, that more one-on-one learning, and then again practicing as a para really before they get that CFO title in our firm.
And so I'm assuming you're paying them during this period.
Yes, yep,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that has worked well in that a lot of times because of our growth and our kind of stretching to meet demand, we tend to have a need for that additional para work. So it's a little bit of an investment on our part, but they're also a little bit billable as they serve in that para role until they become a CFO. So
Okay.
yes, paid program for sure.
Okay. That's great. And so then how then do you keep people on the payroll after they've learned all of this?
Yeah, it really goes back to kind of those elements of you have some leverage over your earnings via our bonus program, and then that control. I mean, I will say, I think the thing, if I had to venture to guess, I think the thing that employees at our firm, and I honestly never use the word employees, I really do use the word teammates for better or for worse, but what people value the most, I think, is the flexibility and trust that like they have their metrics, they know what they are, so no one's babysitting you. Did you get here right at 8 o'clock or was it 8:02? Do you have the right kind of shoes on? Like people, you get a pick. I like being home these days, so those are the days I'm going to work from home, and we have a lot of fun. We have a lot of laughter going on. So number one, I think by the time people become a CFO, we've kind of fallen in love with the team and the culture. They have that leverage over their bonuses. They have that flexibility in how they work and when they work. And then I think the other thing is just our world is very complex, and so it's really hard. If you could go to another firm, and I would just argue there's not going to be the competition and culture most to 9 times out of 10. But then also just our firm, there's so much benefit in having a whole team you can go to. Like we can all go to each other if we have a technical question that we don't know the answer to, and that is huge. So
Mhm. That's excellent. So I think it's another just untapped uh, culture or an untapped benefit that a lot of people are not thinking about, and that is the flexibility. So when I opened up my business, I had young kids or young child. Now I have two. I had a baby during my early years of running my company, and I needed a lot of flexibility. And I'm also energetically somebody who, like, I just get bursts of energy at random times. Like sometimes I'm super energetic at midnight. Sometimes I have lots of energy in the morning. And so I want to be able to do work when I have the energy. And I know a lot of people like that, except that we've been constrained by this like Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 schedule. And so I want to really highlight that yet another company, you guys, that has a flexible environment that's getting results. It is possible,
right, yes.
right?
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yes, it really is. I do think it goes back to the clear expectations and metrics. If you're going to have the flexibility, then what expectations do you have on the backside? I think companies that don't have set expectations and metrics, the way that they think that they make their employees productive is, well, I can see that they're here. I can see that they're doing something. How
Yeah.
about we flip that around and say, like, what defines their productivity, and then let them loose to work how they want to work, because again, otherwise I would argue in this day and age you're going to have churn. You're just going to have lots of turnover. You can
Yeah.
make them come in, can make them work 8 to 5, and then not define their success in terms of numbers and whatever, and then you'll replace them
Right.
in a year or 9 months, whatever. So
Yeah. And
yeah.
do the math on that. That's expensive. That is
Right.
so expensive. And that's another thing that I don't understand why more leaders are not actually looking at the costs associated with having an employee in a shorter, I don't know, lifetime value, right? And so
Mhm.
we talk about the cost of a customer acquisition, the cost of sales, right? Why don't we talk about the cost of an employee? And like there
Right.
is an ROI, a couple of year number of some time frame. It's different for each role around at what point have you've gotten the ROI on that employee. For
Right.
professional services firms like ours, I think my ROI is around 3 years. If
Mhm.
I've lost someone earlier than 3 years, I haven't fully realized the benefit there in my environment. Now, we work with all different types of companies. We have a coffee shop that we work with. We have manufacturing. We have, variety of different roles. And I think there's an ROI with those different roles. But I want to encourage businesses to also do the math on that because if you're losing people soon, it's expensive. It's so
Mm-hmm.
expensive. And
Yes.
so, yeah, and it's not worth it to just because you've got head trash around.
Yeah.
They're not doing work if I can't see them. It's like, well, yeah, they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, you and I have similar philosophies. It was something you said in the beginning. Oh gosh, I might have lost it. But I would go back to like, that I see a lot of clients, really tons of clients with the hiring difficulties. They kind of have the same conversation over and over. Well, I put something on Indeed. I still can't find, we just can't hire in our industry. And I know like hiring's difficult in any industry. But I just like, well, if you don't do anything different, we're not going to get different results. So we can like keep having this conversation, or like you had mentioned with the other folks you've interviewed that have apprenticeships and things like that, or we can get creative and think of something different. Like I love the phrase, if you don't have a good option that you're looking at, then you don't have enough options. So it's
Hmm.
like you have to create more options for yourself.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I just think you have to think as a leader, what would I want? Because if you're confused and frustrated that you keep losing people, I think the question needs to become, well, what would it take for me to stay somewhere? And oftentimes it's not going to be what you have implemented. It's going to be quite the opposite,
Right.
like, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, do you have part-time as well?
Our pairs are part-time,
Okay.
and our CFOs tend to be full-time, but we do tend to get kind of flexible with like, we've had a lot of maternity leave, and so we're pretty flexible around like being able to fill in for each other and then let moms kind of decide how soon they do want to come back and things like that. But yeah, our para position is part-time.
Okay, that's great because I think that opens up another whole pool
Yes.
of people. So when I started turning the corner and I started adding team, I was making enough money to add to the team. I targeted a lot of the stay-at-home parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I say stay-at-home parents because I had a stay-at-home dad at one point too. And it just opened up a whole new pool of candidates because I was able to say, work the hours you want to work. If you want to work 5 hours a week or you want to work 10, I can find work for you. And
Right.
what's been remarkable about that is that so let me just give an actual real world example with this. So one of my employees a few years ago was full time. She said, I'm going to resign because I want to become a guidance counselor. And I was like, oh, that's so exciting. And so she went and started her degree in guidance counseling, came back about 3 weeks later, and she's like, can I work part-time? Because I don't really want to only be in school full time. And I was like, sure. So she said, I can work maybe 17 hours a week. And I was like, all right. Oh my gosh, Megan, I got the most enormous amount of work out of this 17 hours.
Oh
The
my gosh.
productivity, because she was so focused, right?
Yeah.
Kind of expand our energy to the time that we have. And
Yes.
she would just sit down and she was just on top of it. And it
Nail
was
it.
like so amazing. So I like also want to encourage that part-time doesn't necessarily mean part effort.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, our part-time gals, our paras, what's interesting about most of them is they tend to be more retired from something really professional, but don't want to be like fully out of working. And so they're really just professional qualified folks. But oh my gosh, they're the pillars in our team. Like they're experts in their respective areas in the firm, and they're so consistent, and their customer service is off the charts. And yeah, they're part-time, and they're even more flexible in coming and going, like, oh, I'm going to be in Wednesday and yet you don't ever have to ask, like, are you going to get your hours, are you going to get to this, like, we just absolutely don't have to babysit each other, it just, yeah, I completely agree. Part-time does not mean part effort. That's really, really
Mm-hmm.
good way to put that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that's a perfect place for us to end our conversation. So, Megan, thank you so much for joining me today on How I Turned the Corner. It was fascinating to hear your experience.
Thank you so much, Kendra. I mean, it's just, yeah, super refreshing to talk with someone who's philosophically really kind of aligned in this area. But thank you again for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.